Hello and welcome to Topline Talks, a Mackey podcast production by me, Owen Myers.
And me, Jenna Mackey.
As a multi-sector finance and operations recruiter, our aim is to bring our listeners inspiring guests from across a variety of different markets. In the meeting, we will be discussing everything to do with people's career history, how they got to where they are today, a little bit more insight into the sector they work in, and also their talent insights from their career. So today, we're delighted to welcome Emily Bushby, who is Deputy Chief Exec at Nesta and Behavioural Insights Team. Emily, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
Looking forward to a good session. So for the listeners, if you could please just do a very brief intro as to who you are and what your job is, that would be amazing.
Yeah, so I'm the Deputy Chief Exec of a UK-based charity called Nesta. And I've been in that role for about a month or so and been with Nesta for just over a year. When I started there, I was the Group Chief Financial Officer, looking after the finances of Nesta and its main subsidiary that it works with called Behavioural Insights Team, which is a global consulting business trying to look at behavioural science interventions to solve lots of the world's problems. Nesta itself is a really interesting charity. As it said, it's based in the UK. It's funded by the government, by an endowment that's been given to Nesta from the government a very long time ago. And it's really trying to solve problems across the UK, across sustainability, education and health. So 3 really kind of important areas to focus on.
Amazing. Great summary. So can we'll get into that a little bit later on, but could you just give us a little bit more background, I guess, as to how you got to where you are today? So, where it all started and, steps you've taken along the way.
Yeah, sure. So I actually did, I studied psychology as a degree. I've always been really interested in people. And I have to say, I had absolutely no idea what I really wanted to do when I was grown up. So I thought, actually, I'll go and try and get myself into business. I thought I probably would want to be in business of some sort. And so I did the classic route of signing up to become a chartered accountant because I thought that would actually give me really good insight into business and help me understand where I'd want to be later on in my career. So I joined a grad scheme working with PwC in London. And I'm really glad I chose that route. It was such a brilliant learning in terms of how business works, but also kind of helped ease me into professional life because it's almost like you're sort of almost being a student whilst studying accounting, whilst also working. And you meet a great bunch of people. So that was a fantastic experience and a really good kind of base for me. And then I've moved on for various roles since PwC. I've worked in the private sector, the public sector, a university, and sort of ended up knowing that actually working at a charity for an organisation with real purpose was exactly what I wanted to do. So I've had a sort of slightly strange and convoluted career path to get to where I've ended up at Nesta. But it feels like sort of it's drawing together all the different strands of my career to date.
Yeah, well, PwC is a well-trodden path, obviously. But then, you've gone from energy to banking to education, I guess, and now obviously social enterprise. What would you say are the kind of the key themes that you've sort of picked up throughout going across, working across lots of different sectors? That have stead you in good stead for your career development?
Yeah, I think with the background in finance, you can work in so many different sectors, and I've absolutely loved that. I think that's been a sort of really important part of making me the kind of senior leader that I am today, because I've seen so many different ways of working and different kind of approaches. So I think probably having worked across, as you say, banking, and I went to work for a FTSE 100 business as well. I really learned some, good business nous, commerciality, the importance of analytics, and the importance of telling stories behind the numbers. I remember I got absolutely roasted once when I was in a meeting in the FTSE 100 business, which I shall not name, I'd just been put into a role looking after financial planning and analysis for one of their divisions, and I was presenting their quarterly management accounts, and I was doing it to the management team, and I just brought up a slide of numbers, and what I said to the management team was, so this is a bunch of numbers, it's not massively interesting, so let's move on. And it turns out that was a terrible thing to do. And I very much learned from that experience that actually understanding the story behind the numbers and really being able to tell that in a really compelling and not complex manner is absolutely a skill that you can kind of carry on through in everything that you do. And then I think probably working for the charitable organisations that I've worked for and the university that I worked for, I think the power of business partnering was really strong in those organisations as well. What I found was actually coming in with a finance background and working with, say, academics at the university, where I was business partnering with, the brightest and the best brains working on all sorts of different aspects, from architecture to medical side of things to physics and all that sort of stuff. I was business partnering with all the heads of departments and leads in those areas. But what I found was there was a real mutual respect for the skills that you can bring from a finance background as well. And we bring kind of the ability to think commercially, but also really think through all the implications of kind of decision making around where we can put our money, where we can make investments, how we can grow our revenue streams, and then we can put that money to good use. So I think through kind of the private and the public sector aspects that I've had in my career, I've learned lots of different aspects that I can now put into play in my current role, which, as I say, Nesta is a charity, but the Behavioural Insights Team is a for-profit business. And it's quite nice that it's bringing both aspects together.
A good blend, yeah.
You mentioned business partnering. So I think a lot of our listeners have this concept of I really would like to be a finance business partner. In your interpretation, what makes a good finance business partner?
It's all about relationships and trusted relationships as well, and getting to know the people that you're business partnering with, and also what problems they're trying to solve. So spending time with them on a personal one-to-one basis is important. And then, as I say, sort of understanding the story behind the numbers and helping, because you're not always talking to somebody that's necessarily particularly articulate on the financial side of things. And if you're able to help explain those complicated concepts, but in a manner that is actually understandable to all sorts of aspects of walks of life, I guess, then it's a really useful way of supporting whatever their missions and their goals are. So I think really making sure that you build that trusted relationship, but you're also really clear on what they're trying to drive at as well, so that you can try and help them to hit their goals.
Yeah, another guest that we had made a comment not that dissimilar of you have to make the effort to go and talk to people and get to know them, because that may come more naturally to some people than others, but it doesn't mean that person isn't actually deliberately and purposefully going out to make the effort to get to know them. And I think that's often the thing that can be underrated, is that face-to-face interaction.
Yeah, and it's difficult in our hybrid working environment at the moment to build up those relationships quite as we might have done before COVID times.
Yeah.
But then I think that's probably all the more kind of necessity to actually really put the effort in. Face-to-face is great. We can also build relationships on Zoom. It's just a little bit trickier.
Yeah, because obviously BIT is international, isn't it?
Exactly.
So I guess, how do you do that with the same level of impact via a Teams call versus a face-to-face?
Yeah, it's really, really tricky. And there are aspects of Behavioural Insights Team that I've not managed to get out and travel to their sites, partly because, we're really kind of cost conscious. So we've not actually been able to afford to go out there. Plus, it's not great for carbon emissions. So actually, again, you just have to really work hard on that interpersonal relationship stuff. Make sure you're in touch via Slack as well as email, as well as trying to meet each other, and really be clear as to, like I say, what they're trying to deliver, so that you feel like you're working in tandem and you're bringing your finance skills and you're helping them bring out whatever sort of skills that they have as well.
Yeah. I feel like this has accidentally been a bit of a plug for Teams and Slack to everyone out there.
Fair point. Other products are also available.
Zoom is okay too.
Yeah.
So talk to us. So your role now is broader than finance, right? So you've obviously climbed the ladder, got CFO level, etc. How? Because we do speak to a lot of people, particularly if they hit the senior management or the exec level in finance, thinking, I want to move out into the business and be an MD, or I want to climb the ladder to a chief exec or whatever it is. How have you found the transition to do something broader than finance?
I think initially, so actually probably my last role I was in my last organisation, I was chief operating officer there. And it also had a finance angle to it as well. But that was my first experience of having direct reports that were not in finance. So I had a real variety of people working with me and for me across sort of comms and HR and health and safety and all such aspects. And to be honest, to start with, I found it really difficult. It was when I've been working with finance colleagues, you just have a sort of, I don't know what it is, but a natural affinity. Even though you can be very different people, you almost got the same kind of background in terms of your professional background, I guess, is super similar. And then when you're working with people across lots of different backgrounds, I found that really challenging, and I felt like I was just getting in the way, to be honest. And I was also trying to learn what they were doing so I could be of value. And actually, the one thing that I learned through that was actually I need to get out of the way of them. I need to trust in the skills of the people that are kind of working for me in lots of different sectors or skills, and make sure that actually they're just fully empowered to carry on doing their good work. And I'm really there to sort of, I guess, cheerlead for them and support them and manage them in a manner that means that they're like really empowered. And then moving into the current role that I've had, I actually found it easier having had that sort of initial experience, I guess. And I want to try and, I guess, bring a bit of a focus on value for money across Nesta. So actually, I can look at the broader operational effectiveness, but always with a bit of a financial background to it, because charities have to be super careful about the money that they're spending and make sure that they're really looking for that value for money in all that they do. And the other aspect I would say that has helped me in my career in terms of broadening out my role is that I've had a couple of trustee positions. So I've been a sort of non-executive director on a board of a couple of charities. And that has just been so eye-opening in terms of needing to understand all different aspects of an organisation. So whether that's how to retain staff or looking at the kind of key risks or trying to drive up commerciality, all sorts of different kind of aspects that a business needs to look at. So through those trustee experiences, I think I've managed to kind of gain a bit of a better understanding for life outside of finance as well.
Slightly different kettle of fish, but I'm a governor at my children's school. How have you found the difference in being a trustee and not operational versus working a job where actually it's your job to be operational and get stuff done?
I have loved the kind of, I guess, the juxtaposition of the two. I think, some non-execs or trustees can sometimes be accused of potentially becoming a bit too executive-like or a bit too involved with the decision-making. So I've been conscious to not do that and to really kind of trust and rely upon the management team. And equally, to be honest, I don't actually have enough time because I have a really busy day job and then I'm doing a sort of a trusteeship on the side. I don't have enough time to get more involved than I am anyway. So that's probably quite handy for them anyway. But I think having been on the other side of the table now and knowing that to be a really good trustee or NED is really about asking really insightful and incisive questions and trying to support the management team through. It's a different hat, a different skill set that you're applying, I think. But then you learn a lot from asking those sorts of questions to then be able to apply it to your day job as well.
Yeah, no, I'd agree.
Did you find that as well?
Absolutely, yeah. I think initially I found it quite odd.
Yeah,
because I've always been in a job where it's you just roll your sleeves up and get stuff done. But then as I kind of eased into it, and you get a bit more familiar and comfortable with actually what your role is as a critical friend, I've got quite a lot out of it actually. But likewise, frustrated that I don't have the time to do more and help more. So. Okay, very good. That's really insightful. Should we move on to talk a little bit more about the industry that you operate in at the moment? So Nesta, your strategy was revamped fairly recently. Do you want to talk through the 3 key pillars, I guess, that you're working in a bit more detail, and I guess maybe how that's come about and what the focus is?
Yeah. So we had a new chief exec join about 4 years ago, I think it was. And they went through a really kind of rigorous strategy update review process to try and determine what are we going to do for Nesta for the next 10 years. So there's a 10-year strategy, which we're 3 years into, and all sorts of different mission areas were looked at when considering what to focus on. And then we've ended up looking at 3. So as I mentioned, there's sustainability, education, and health. And within those 3 missions, we've actually set ourselves really ambitious, almost moonshot goals to try and kind of reduce the issues in those areas. So, for example, on the health one is actually we're trying to halve obesity in 10 years' time. Mm-hmm. And on the sustainability one, we're trying to reduce the carbon emissions from our households by 1/3. And in the education one, we're trying to completely eliminate the attainment gap for kids aged 5. So whatever background and upbringing you have, there should be kind of no difference in your kind of abilities at school, etc. So super ambitious targets that we're trying to hit at the end of this 10-year strategy. And it's been really interesting to have, numerical goals to try and hit and find ways of making sure that with the resources that we have at Nesta, are we on track to be able to hit those? And we actually think that we do have a path, at least for 2 of those 3 missions, to be able to achieve them. And if we do in those 10 years, then that's really quite game-changing. It's very motivational to work somewhere like that. And what we're actually doing on a day-to-day basis is we're basically designing and testing and scaling interventions to be able to solve those problems. And we do that either by partnering up with other organisations, or we're also building our own ventures as well, so sort of small businesses that we're investing in to try and kind of scale up in the mission areas. And then we also try and do a bit of policy shaping as well. So, if we can get governments to adopt some of the strategies that we're talking about, well, that's the biggest and quickest way of really scaling up to try and hit our missions as well.
Those are 3 amazing missions. And I think most charities focus on one.
Yes, that's fair.
How do you balance the 3? Because I'm sure they semi-interlink from time to time, but actually they're all quite individual.
Yeah, that's such a good question. And it's actually something that sort of, we weigh up all the time. I think, to start with, we basically went onto the premise of let's just kind of work a third across each of those missions. And then in those missions, we've got different ways of kind of scaling up as well. And we're, as I say, only 3 years into this 10-year strategy. So we're still learning about kind of where the most effective interventions are. We're doing a strategy update at the moment. You could say, actually, are there any of those missions that we think we genuinely should double down in and just completely focus on and not work on the other 2 missions? But in actual fact, we think we've got, like I say, a path to actually delivering all 3 potentially. So we just have to have a very careful, review of the fact that we are making impactful decisions with the money that we have. And then that's where my role comes in, to just try and make sure that of the money that we spend every year, which is about 22 million or so at the moment, of money that we have within Nesta that we spend on trying to do this design, test and scale up interventions, that it is going into really impactful projects that we're working on.
Yeah, that's so cool. Did BIT ever get involved in supporting that from an investigative kind of piece?
Exactly. There's loads of crossover between Behavioural Insights and Nesta. Behavioural Insights are sort of to some extent sector agnostic. We haven't asked them to focus just on the missions. They're a global business and they can work on whatever they like to, particularly. But actually, we're finding that there's loads of brilliant kind of behavioural science interventions that can be applied to the projects that Nesta are working on. And there's really good skills in Nesta as well that we can actually apply to behavioural insights projects as well, around our data science practices, etc. So there's a really nice crossover between the 2. And actually, I think it helps with our business development across behavioural insights once we have this deep expertise at Nesta that we can translate across. And then if we can look at interventions that work on a global scale through behavioural insights and apply it into the UK through Nesta, it's a really nice kind of partnership.
So for those that aren't familiar with BIT, so the original incarnation was the nudge unit, right?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
That was built in David Cameron in Number 10.
Yeah, exactly.
You give some insight into that. It's fascinating how it's developed.
Yeah, back in the day when David Cameron decided to set up a nudge unit in the UK government, coming out of some really exciting behavioural science kind of theories over that really started off in America. And so, but we were the first governmental nudge unit that had been created, set up by David Halpin and a team within the Cabinet Office. And then they were working within government. They found some really cool interventions. They helped set up a scheme where we all opt into pensions now. And opting into pensions is seen as completely normal. But actually, it's something that was a sort of behavioural science nudge, I guess, to help us all save for the future. And so there are loads of those different kind of nudges that they were performing across government. More recent examples, when we were in COVID times, the government were trying to work out how do we get vaccine uptake to increase. And so Behavioural Insights Team try to sort of randomised control trials for a few different sort of text message scripts and tested out which ones are going to actually increase that vaccine uptake. And so by doing these sorts of small-scale trials and then rolling it out across government, you end up with interventions that actually do make a difference. And so, that's the kind of work that Behavioural Insights do. And they grew their business, so they've gone global now. They've got offices in Australia, Singapore, just opened an office in Colombia, because Latin America is a really exciting new market for us, where behavioural science is really, really taking off. And so scaling up the business is something that we're very interested to do, whilst continuing to work with our kind of government partners in the UK as well.
Fascinating story, isn't it?
Really
how
cool.
it's developed and what they do. So given we are a recruiter, we're going to talk a little bit more about talent and your experiences of, I guess, developing your career, applying for jobs, hiring, firing, maybe. I don't know. We'll get into that. So from your career to date, in how you have gone for jobs, got promotions, etc., have you got any sort of key takeaways that you think is good advice for people that's thinking about career planning and looking for various moves in their careers?
Yeah, this is going to be slightly the opposite to the suggestion, which is actually I haven't done much career planning.
Right.
And I've quite liked the fact that I've slightly followed my nose in terms of the opportunities that have presented themselves. So I know most of the advice out there is to do some decent career planning. Actually, I've generally just, if I've been approached for an opportunity that feels like it's a good fit for what I'm looking for, it fits with the purpose that I'm looking for, and it also brings skills that I haven't done before, then that's the kind of opportunity that I've ended up going for, which I think is how my CV might look a bit random with my banking and my FTSE 100 and charity and university. But actually, I think just having that really broad experience has been brilliant for me. So I've liked not specialising. So it's a bit of an alternative route to the normal, but I would really recommend it.
Was there a point, because obviously you were in commercial and then wanted to, so even the move into the charitable sector wasn't necessarily deliberate, it just kind of came about at a time where you felt you wanted a change?
Yeah, and I was working for that FTSE 100 business that I mentioned earlier, and I did feel that there wasn't really enough purpose in what they were doing. And therefore, I felt like I was curious to know what it would be like to work for a charity where it was directly helping people. So I went to work for a cancer charity straight after that. But at the time, I was told when I was applying to work at the charity to go from the commercial place, that I'd find it really difficult to get into the charity. And I was actually put in as the wild card entrant into the process and managed to end up getting the role. And I'm super grateful that I did, because that really did affirm to me that having purpose is a really important aspect for me to feel really motivated to do a good job.
Yeah, I think that's been really, we've noticed a lot of change in that post-COVID. I think COVID was a real time of self-reflection for a lot of people. And I think people bring in purpose so much more into their jobs and their careers and wanting to feel like that. Making that transition from commercial to charity, how was it different? Like, how did you find adapting to it?
Yeah, it was quite a different culture. I had probably been quite used to working at quite a fast pace and be quite snappy with decision making. And then I did have to sort of slow myself down a little bit as well. When I moved into the charity world, the pace of decision making was relatively slow. And obviously you're focused more on cost savings, value for money, rather than trying to sort of increase profitability by boosting your revenue. So it's a different way of working. But I feel like working within those constraints is actually quite motivating. Trying to deliver the best that you possibly can within a small amount of money is actually, I found that quite motivating.
Yeah. What's your advice to someone wanting to get into the charity sector then?
I actually think if you consider doing a trustee role in a charity, and I started doing my trustee role absolutely ages ago, so I was relatively junior in my career, and I just thought it's going to add another string to my bow. And having done that role, that also helped me, I think, find a charity position. So if anybody happens to have the time or inclination and has a charity that they're super supportive of, or just a local community centre or something they can get involved with, then I think that would give you brilliant kind of exposure to what it's like. And then in terms of kind of, just sort of trying to get a new day job in the charitable world, coming from a commercial sector, I think just, again, go for causes that you're really interested in, and that passion will come through in interview. And you'll be bringing your commercial nous to an organisation that really needs that. I think things have moved on from when I did the move from commercial to charity. Yeah. I think back in the day, probably about 10 or so, if not more years ago, that was seen as quite radical. Yeah. I think actually now many charities are looking for commercial expertise. So don't be afraid to try and make that jump, I'd say.
Yeah.
I think that's absolutely the case. And we do a lot of work, in that respect. It is linked to calls though, because I think sometimes, an organisation might say, well, we want to bring in a commercial skill set, but actually when it comes down to it, the people that they end up choosing actually have some form of affinity to the cause or what's happening. Otherwise it can just feel a little bit off. So I think, if anyone's looking to get into the sector, actually it's what's going to get you out of bed, what actually do you feel quite passionate about, and then that's probably going to come across a little bit more in an interview or application sort of process.
Yeah, it's really good advice. Yeah.
When you're hiring specifically, so if anyone wants a job at Nesta or BIT, what do you think makes a difference during an interview and application process?
I think I'm pretty open-minded in terms of, I guess, experience. I think what probably comes through is attitude and probably alignment to values as well. So for candidates, I would say always have a look at if you can find the company's values on their website before you're applying, and really think through, does it meet your values? Is it aligned to how you are? And I think if there is that alignment, then that makes a real difference when I'm kind of interviewing for roles as well, because it's really important we have a very diverse team, but you can have diversity and still have kind of alignment in your values. So that's the kind of thing that we've been looking for when we're recruiting, as well as, to some extent you expect there to be the technical expertise, depending on the kind of level. And we always, go through the competency-based questions to make sure that actually there is the sort of some understanding of the experience that you'd need to have in order to do the job. I think it's really important to hire for potential as well as just experience. Yeah. And I think that also helps you get to really good, diverse candidates as well.
What are the ultimate do not do's during the interview process for a job at Nesta or BIT?
I mean, this may sound a bit silly, but I offered a job once to somebody with a really floppy handshake. And I regretted it. it was just a sign of a terrible fit. So don't do a floppy handshake.
So you offered the job, but
yes,
regretted
we were
it immediately.
Totally. And they left quite quickly. So that's probably a trust your gut answer, really.
So basically, don't be a candidate with a floppy handshake.
Yeah.
And as a hiring manager, trust your gut
Trust
and
your gut.
don't go against it. Oh, I love that. I feel like that's probably a good opportune moment to segue into a little quiz that we like to do with all of our guests. Because actually the first part is about hiring and what you think is important. And the second part is a little bit of a get to know you a little bit more. There are no right or wrong answers, so you can't get anything wrong.
Okay.
But they are quick fire questions.
Okay.
So you need to answer them fairly quickly. So I'll have to get my notes out, I'm afraid. So we'll kick off with a little top line quiz. So question number 1, when you are interviewing, what do you think is more important? KPMG or Deloitte?
Oof. Deloitte?
Practice or industry?
Or industry?
Potential or experience?
Potential?
Sector or skill set?
Skill set.
Skill set. And sector questions to link it a little bit back to Nesta as well. So if people could do one thing that would have an impact on the following 3 areas, what would they be? So working towards a sustainable planet, what's the one thing they could do?
Put a heat pump in your house if you can.
Love it.
Plug for heat pumps.
Yeah.
Healthy living.
Oh, all you need to do is cut your calories in your shopping basket by about 10 or 20%, and that makes all the difference. So have a really good look at those labels of the things that you're buying.
These are such plugs. I love it. Social mobility.
Oh, yeah, that one's a bit trickier. So that one you often need a bit of government intervention. But actually, I think if there's the ability to just try and learn from all the different there's loads of apps out there and loads of podcasts to try and help work out how to solve social mobility, that's probably a good start point.
Nice. And one last clincher. Is AI an opportunity or a concern?
I would say it's an opportunity.
Great. Why?
Well, we're looking at the moment as to how we can best use AI. And we actually had at Nesta, we ran a discovery month to look into how we can use AI. It's amazing at taking lots of data sets and throwing out really good analysis from it. So at Nesta, we're often using large and complex data sets to try and work out what interventions we can do to solve those mission areas that we're talking about. So it can play a huge part in that. And even as simple as we were recruiting for an internal auditor role within the organisation, and we asked ChatGPT, other AI options are available, what the job description could look like. And it came up with a brilliant one that we really didn't need to change at all. So it can just make your life a bit easier with some of the administrative things that you wouldn't even imagine as well.
I actually remember that. I remember you saying, ChatGPT came up with this.
Didn't really know whether to fess up or not, but yes.
No, it was great. It was really good. That was our top line quiz.
So final question is, who would you most like to see on this podcast and why?
I think you should probably bring in my colleague Naomi, who is the newish finance director of Behavioural Insights. And I think she's had a really fascinating few months working with them, and also working as a for-profit business owned by a UK charity. That's a really unusual thing. So I think she'd be fantastic.
Amazing.
Well, that's it. Thank you, Emily, so much for coming in. It's been amazing having you as a guest. And I think hopefully our listeners will have gained loads of insight about commercial sector, moving into the charitable sector, and learning loads more about Nesta and BIT, of course. For our listeners, if you enjoyed what you heard today, please do hit subscribe. We are on Apple, YouTube and Spotify. And that's it for today. And this has been Topline Talks. Thanks for listening.
Cheerio. Thanks.
Bye.